All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Brittany and I am the coordinator for the Crow Wing County Master Gardener Volunteer Program. We have people both in person and on Zoom today, so thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions as they go, most of the questions we'll hold till the end and we'll answer both the Zoom and in-person questions. But if you have anything come up, feel free to enter it into the chat, or if you're having technical difficulties, let me know in the chat too. So today Anita will be talking on starting a garden, the basics. Anita's been a Master Gardener volunteer since 2022. She's a jack of all trades gardener and has been involved in both vegetable gardening in the Giving Gardens and then shrubs and perennials in the Memorial Gardens. She's been a lifelong gardener and recently moved up to North Country, and she says she likes gardening up north more than she does in Brooklyn Park. So take it away, Anita.
So good afternoon. This is my first try at this, so please bear with and be patient. Okay, that works. So here's what we're covering. This is a huge topic, and so this is like maybe 5,000 foot level information that I'm going to give you. I'll dive down in a couple places, but otherwise, here's our subjects for the day, for the talk, for the hour. I'm going to start talking about a location and size of your garden. When you're looking to put a new garden in your yard, take a look at where you have sunlight and how much sunlight you have in the spaces in your yard or where you're looking to put a garden. If you want to do vegetables, a good 6 to 8 hours of good sunlight per day is really what's going to make your vegetables grow. And that's generally referring to morning and early afternoon sun when it's at its most intense. Sunlight requirements for plants are identified as either full sun, which is that 6 to 8 or more, part sun, which is when the plant is going to be in shade part of the time, but in sun more of the time. Part shade, where it's in shade most of the time with a little bit of direct sun exposure, and finally full shade, where there's really no direct sun exposure. And different plants have different sunlight requirements, so you're going to have to select the plants for the area to make sure that you're giving them what they want. And as I said, vegetables want 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. There's a lot of flowers and other plants that can tolerate full shade or different levels of sunlight. So you've got a lot more options if you're not going to try to do a vegetable garden. The amount of space that you have is going to decide how many plants you can have or how many rows of vegetables you can put in your garden. So that's something to keep in mind. And the other thing I really want to point out is who's going to take care of this. My husband, well, it's an important question, because if it's just you don't want to overdo and burn yourself out on tilling the garden or on weeding the garden. Nobody wants to plant what they think is going to be this beautiful flower bed and then get so tired of weeding by the end that it looks like all they've got is weeds and be discouraged and then not garden again. So consider that. If you've got kids that are helping or sons or daughters that are scouts working on a merit badge, that's great, because you can always send them to the garden. But if it's just you, that's kind of a different story. All right, now we're talking about dirt. Soil is comprised of solids, liquids, and gases. The solids are mostly mineral or inorganic material like clay or sand or loam. The organic material is going to be some living organisms. That's the worms and the microorganisms that live in soil. It's also referring to the non-living material, the humus and the plant material like composted material or roots from plants that grew there previously. Humus is that stuff left behind by all the living organisms, the worm poop and so on, that enrich the soil because it contains some of the nutrients needed by the plants. You need, or another component of soil is water, of course. That really is what's occupying the spaces between all the solid particles of the dirt and the organic stuff, and the gases. And the gases in soil are basically the same thing that we're breathing, although the carbon dioxide content is going to be higher because that's what the plants are giving off. So in Minnesota, the dominant texture of soil is called loam. And loam is a rich, crumbly soil. It's almost equal parts sand and silt. Silt is what we would call dirt, right? And and less clay. And in the USDA's definition of loam, it's 40% silt, 40% sand, and 20% clay. I'm still working on the technology here too, so bear with. So the ideal soil for vegetables, you want a nice loamy or sand soil or loamy sand. We tried to grow root vegetables in Brooklyn Park before we moved up here, and the high clay content in that soil made it almost impossible to grow anything other than a little bitty round radish. Nothing was able to penetrate even after we tilled. It would just recompact back down. Back to that ideal soil, it's going to have a black surface layer of about 5 to 6 inches deep, and below that it's going to be a lighter, a brown color rather than that nice rich black color. Not compacted, that means it's not pressed together, so there's pores between those solid particles that the water and the gases can be present or not be excluded. And then water infiltration refers to the ability of soil moisture water to soak into the soil, the surface. And then percolation refers to that ability of the water to move through the soil. And you need both of those characteristics for your plants for the water to get to the roots of your plants and the other nutrients to get to the plant roots as well. It also needs to be well drained. You aren't going to have much success in an area where the soil isn't well drained and your plants are sitting in, as plant roots are in water all the time, and they will rot. Okay. So you can look at your soil and think you know what you've got, but the best way to find out just what's there or not there is to get your soil tested. And the University of Minnesota does conduct soil testing. You can submit samples. They will report back on the percent organic matter, the phosphorus and potassium content, the pH. We'll talk about chemical characteristics in a couple slides, the texture, and actually provide a fertilizer and a lime recommendation. And the cost for this test is $20 per sample. It's a pretty good deal. So this is a copy of the actual sample submission form. It requires, name and address and all that. Identify your soil sample. Tell what you plan on using that sample for, or that soil for, or using that space for, I guess. And the next page, which I did not provide a copy of, has the actual instructions on how to collect and submit the sample. You don't want to just dig one hole, grab a handful of dirt and submit it. If you've got a garden space, you're going to want to sample from multiple areas in that garden space before you, and mix them before you submit the samples. All right, so now you've submitted your sample. This is what your test results, your report looks like. it doesn't show my, oh, it doesn't show my cursor. How do I get it to, can I draw on there? Or, you know what I mean? I can see it on the screen.
Mhm. I don't think I can.
Okay.
No.
All right. No, that's okay. I thought about that as I was looking at it this morning. Hope there'd be a way. So that first row across under soil test results, it's telling you that what your estimated soil texture is, the percent of organic matter in the sample that you submitted, the pH, the percent, or not percent phosphorus, but the phosphorus content in parts per million, and potassium are the two next numbers in the row. And then further down in the text box, it is giving the recommendation for lime, which is basically if you have an extremely acid soil, you would want to add lime to raise the pH. And the actual recommended fertilizer. And so this particular sample came back and it said 0.15 pounds per 100 square feet of nitrogen, 0 pounds of phosphate, and 0.3 pounds of potassium or potash. And so that fertilizer ratio that you would find on the bag would be 15-0-30. So then, and when you get your soil test report, again, I did not make a copy of the page because the text is very tiny. It gives you a way to interpret all of the information that's on the soil test report. Okay, so when you're going to make modifications to your soil, you're going to want to incorporate it. You can't just throw stuff on top and think it's going to be effective. So you're going to want to till that material in. Tilling also is going to loosen your compacted soil, and that will also help increase the pore spaces, which is where the water and the gases occupy. It will help improve the infiltration, again, that soaking in of the rain or the watering that you're doing, and the percolation, the water's ability to move through that soil. It softens the soil up so that the roots of your plants can expand further. And it also, most importantly, not most, just as important, it's working in that stuff that you've added to the top, the fertilizer, the mulch that is going to help aerate the soil, and the compost and the fertilizer, and just dirt if you're adding dirt. Some people will get a bag of garden soil or something like that to add. You don't want all of that stuff to just lay on top. Like I said, that's stratification. And it basically means that there's nothing in some of the layers of the dirt and too much in other layers of the dirt. So you want it all mixed together. Okay, you can till by hand. You can use a hand shovel. You can use just a regular garden shovel, or if you've got a big enough space, you can always till using a rototiller. All right, I said I'd talk about chemical properties of the soil. pH is a measure of acidity versus alkalinity. It's on a scale of 1 to 14, where 1 means something is very acid and 14 means something is very alkaline. Basic is another word for alkaline. So a pH of 7 means something is neutral. It's neither acid nor alkaline. Most of our garden plants like to be in soil that is somewhere between 5.5, a pH of 5.5 and 7.0. Although there are a number of plants that prefer a more acidic soil. And when I say acidic, I'm not saying like pH of 1 or 2. I'm talking about like 5.2 to 5.5. Some of those things, some of those plants that like acidic soils are things like potatoes and rhubarb, blueberries. I think we all know blueberries. Cranberries, rhododendron and azalea, and blue hydrangeas. Most Minnesota soils contain lime, which is going to buffer that acidity level and raise the pH in the base material. So you can try to acidify soil if you're going to be planting blueberries or some of these other things that like acid soil. But if there's lime present in your soil, that gets kind of difficult because anything that you add to acidify, the lime is just going to neutralize right back and raise the pH.
How often do you need to acidify?
You would have to test, and it might be, if you're actually trying to lower the pH significantly, you should probably add your supplement and then test, let it work in, test, and keep looking at it. It can get pretty expensive according to the references to actually lower the pH of soil if there's lime there. All right, just like people and animals, plants need nutrients too. The three main nutrients that plants need, the macronutrients, are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And those are the three numbers that you'll see on your fertilizer when you're shopping for fertilizer. In Minnesota soil, again, from the references, in Minnesota soil, all three of those may be deficient, and that's why seems like we're always fertilizing. So this is a picture of a label off a package of fertilizer. This happens to be a liquid fertilizer. And you can see the numbers are 511. That means it's 5% total nitrogen. It's hard to read on my screen. I have to look that way. Sorry. 5% total nitrogen, 1% available phosphate, and 1% of soluble potash. So the fertilizer, as you purchase it, whether you purchase it in a liquid form or in a solid form, is going to have application uses. And on this particular one, it's you can see that in the upper left-hand corner, and then directions for use in the upper right-hand corner. So again, one type of fertilizer that's got low concentrations of the various nutrients. All right, the next critical element, besides the sun and the soil and the nutrients, is water for your plants. So where are you going to get the water from for your garden area? It's nice to count on Mother Nature, but we know we can't. So you're probably going to have to be watering your plants throughout the growing season. Don't overwater your plants. If you test your soil, you can test your soil by sticking your finger in the soil. And if it feels dry in that first 5 to 6 inches, water. It's better to water deeply and less often than provide a little bit of water per day. Watering deeply will ensure that the water gets down to the plant roots rather than sitting on the soil, on the surface, and evaporating back off again, especially on hot days. It's also better to water in the morning so that the leaves of your plants are allowed to dry off. Watering in the evening can allow the water to be retained on the leaf surfaces, and that can lead to diseases on the leaves or fungal growth on the leaves. How much and how often you're watering is going to depend on the soil type, and the amount of rainfall you're getting. So checking rather than automatically watering, no automatic waterers for your garden areas. Check your soil. Using mulch will help conserve the moisture in the soil and reduce the evaporation from the surface. So mulch is a good thing. And are you using sprinklers versus soaker or drip type systems. Generally soaker and drip systems that water from underneath so that you're getting less water on the plant leaves is better than sprinklers. But if you've got a large area to water, we're going to sprinkle. You can collect rainwater if your water has has a lot of mineral content in it. A high mineral or iron content can actually discolor leaves if you're sprinkling. We actually had that happen at the Arboretum last summer. So now you're going to want to plan your garden. Know how large your space is. Knowing how large your space is going to allow you to figure out how many rows to put in like a vegetable garden, or how many plants or what size plants you can put in different areas. Each plant is going to have a different amount of spread and height to it, and that's identified on the tag either from your seed packet or from the tag from the nursery. Okay, consider as you're laying your garden out whether you want similar colors or contrasting colors. There's thousands of plants to select from, so you've got thousands, maybe millions of combinations. You don't want to overcrowd your plants. That can also lead to transmission of pests and or diseases. And your garden layout itself doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just use a piece of paper. And here's just a quick and dirty sample. I took the back of a piece of paper and laid out what our garden was going to be, where we would put the tomatoes, where the cukes would be, and you know, some plants get hilled rather than are just a little thing and need some spread. Some want to go tall and might need some supports. And this is basically the size of our garden at home, right, Tom? Yeah. So decide what you're going to go with. Are you going to do flowers or vegetables? That's totally up to you. It is, I have to say, it is the most satisfying thing to go out to the garden and pick a tomato and make the first BLT of the season. That is one of the best tastes in the whole world. Even, yeah, doesn't even matter. Probably wouldn't even need bacon. But if you're going with flowers, you've got, like I said, thousands of choices, hundreds of choices maybe in this area. You can go with annuals, which is a plant that will grow, bloom, and die within one planting season. You can go with perennials, which are going to come back year after year and hopefully grow and provide that similar color in your garden year after year. Flowers are going to attract birds and pollinators. Certain flowers are more attractive to hummingbirds. Sunflowers will bring in the birds like the chickadees that will eat right off the head of the seed, the ripe seeds right off the head of the sunflower. It's fun to watch. For vegetables, I would say pick things that you like, of course. Don't plant things that you're not going to eat, but they can always be given away. If your harvest is too big, you don't have to throw it away. There are friends and neighbors that love fresh produce, and there are also food shelves that will accept fresh produce. So don't worry about, I'm going to plant 5 rows of beans and have too many. There's always somebody that takes fresh beans. Okay, you do want to select varieties that can be harvested within our growing season. You don't want something that you started in the end of May or whatever time it was, and you still don't have ripe watermelon or squash or whatever it might be by the end of the season. Most of the plants that are sold here are going to be within that growing season, but take a look at the package before you buy it. Some vegetables actually can be planted for multiple harvests. Radishes and lettuce are the examples I list here, but there are some other things as well. and something like bunching onions can be planted and picked for green onions. And then by the end of the season, you might have onions that you could slice into your dishes as well. talking more about picking plants. Most of the time when you're looking at putting a garden in, you're going to arrange your things by height so that the shorter plants are in front and not blocked out from sun and from viewing by the higher, taller plants. You're also going to group your plants by what their sun and water needs and even fertilizer needs might be. You don't want to put the shady stuff where they're going to be in full sun and get burnt out by too much sun exposure. By the same token, you don't want to put the stuff that is sun loving in a place where it's not going to get enough and not be able to thrive and bloom. Okay. There are things called companion plants where some plants are deeper rooted and some plants are shallow rooted. So you can plant them closer to one another so that they can essentially occupy the same space and still get the benefit of both of those plants. The other thing to consider is the proximity to other plants or what was planted there previously. And that is referring to the idea that you don't want to put tomatoes in the same space, same exact place year after year after year, because tomatoes are often subject to blossom end rot, and that fungus can survive in the soil over winter, and the next year it's just going to be worse if you put your tomatoes in the same place. The other thing that we haven't encountered, but I know others have, is putting annuals and perennials in the same space and then forgetting where the perennials were and tilling up that garden space and destroying the perennials, the roots or corms or bulbs, whatever it was. So. So here's an example of some seed packets. They're essentially for the same material or for the same plant, flat leaf parsley, but from different suppliers you get different information or the same information presented in a slightly different way. So you can see the first packet on the left is telling you that it's a plant that wants full sun or part shade. If you look at the one at the far right, then it tells you it wants full sun. The heights and such are essentially the same. But what you want to look at, what you use the seed packet for, is for information about when you can plant it in the ground and how close to plant the seeds to one another. And if you're planting a row crop, how far apart to place the rows. So again, it's presented different ways. On the Burpee packet, you actually see a little map of the United States with different colors representing the different areas and when that material or when that plant can get put in the ground, that seed can get put in the ground. On the other packet, it actually tells you with words. So some reading is required. So you really, this time of year, you have three options for starting a garden. You can either start your plants indoors, doesn't take much, sunny window and some peat pots, and watering regularly. You can direct seed in the ground, not this early for most things, but by the end of April, there are some things that can get seeded in the ground. They are frost resistant and they can get started that early. The last option is bedding plants from the nursery or the greenhouse or the grocery store or the big box store. We've got plenty of options around here. So again, the seed packet, like we looked at on the previous slide, tells you when you can put them, start them in the indoors versus when you can start them directly in the ground. The bedding plants will need to be what's called hardened off before you actually put them into your garden. Hardening off is that process of exposing them to the outside so that they are not shocked when you actually put them in the ground. And there's still a little bit of shock that often occurs, but if you harden them off before you just dump them in the ground, you'll have a better chance of success. There is a fourth option for starting plants, but it's called winter sowing. And that's something that you do when there's still snow on the ground. And so that, well, we still have snow on the ground, okay, but that's something that you generally are doing in January or February. So that ship has sailed, at least for this year. The next one is we're talking about, or I'll talk about, is pests. All right. Deer and rabbits are the biggest pests, the ones that we can actually control the easiest, if you think about it. The other one is insects. The deer and rabbits so appreciate when we put their food in this nice, convenient location, right? You plan on going out and picking your pea pods or whatever it might be for dinner that night, and sure enough, the night before is when they got to your plants. Disappointing. You can prevent rabbits from accessing your garden fairly easily. It takes about a 2-foot high fence. You can use chicken wire. If you've got adult rabbits, you can use a 2-inch by 4-inch grid type fence. They will get through most chain link fence, by the way, but you can use that 2-inch by 4-inch grid. It won't keep the little bunnies out, but it will keep the adults out. For deer, you need a fence that's about 8 feet high. And a motivated deer can jump an 8-foot fence, a fence that's less than 8 feet, excuse me, the way I should have said that. So there are plants, plenty of plants, flowering plants that are identified as deer and rabbit resistant, and that works. But a motivated rabbit or deer, when there's any kind of feeding pressure, is going to eat just about anything that's green. So be aware that deer and rabbit resistant on the tag or on the package or whatever it might be is not a guarantee that the deer and rabbits won't eat your garden, your plants. Okay. I'm going to jump over to insects here for a minute. You need to be able to, not all bugs are bad, believe it or not. They don't all eat your plants. Some are actually beneficial. Some eat the bugs that do eat your plants. So you need to be able to distinguish the beneficial and the ones that neither are helpful nor harmful from the ones that are harmful. Japanese beetles are becoming a problem around here. They were horrible in the cities when we lived down there. A lot of the plants wound up looking more like lace. The leaves look more like lace than leaves. It's kind of neat looking, except for the bugs. Anyway, and there are traps available for some of these bugs. There were traps for Japanese beetles that were somewhat effective. But if the damage, if in your garden, if the damage is minimal, you're seeing that there is some insect problem on your plants. If the damage is minimal, you might decide to not do anything. Or you can remove the bugs manually, the insects manually. Japanese beetles, it sounds gross, touching bugs, but for some people anyway, can be removed manually from your plants. You can remove the Colorado potato beetles from your potato plants manually. And when we had an issue with the potato beetles a few years ago, didn't always catch them before, get rid of them before they laid the eggs. You can crush with your fingers the larvae that are on the underside of the leaves and stop that predation. They won't be able to eat the leaves if there's squished goo on the bottom of the leaf. Okay. If you're hand picking the bugs manually, I know that sounds gross, doesn't it? Sorry. If you're hand picking the bugs, not to those of us who do it, right? If you're hand picking the insects off, just dump them in a bucket or a glass of soapy water, and that'll kill them, and they're done. Like I said, traps are effective for some things. If you've got slugs, you can pick them off the plants. A slug is really just a shell-less snail that's living on ground instead of near water. You can also use something like a beer trap, a dilute beer solution that attracts, or even yeast, like baker's yeast in water, dissolved in water, will attract the slugs, and then they will try to get in there and drown in the liquid. You do have to change that occasionally, or it gets a little nasty. You can encourage predators of those insects, like ladybugs. And your last resort should really be an insecticide. And I only say that because insecticides, for the most part, are non-discriminate. They're going to kill the good ones and the bad ones. And so unless you've got a severe infestation, that's your last choice. Okay. I probably should have reorganized this. Anyway, so I'm back to talking about deer now. And you can use something that's called a micro exclosure, not enclosure. You put up a 4-foot fence around your smaller garden area, and the deer are, it's basically a psychological deterrent for the deer. They don't like jumping into what appears to be a small space that they might not be able to escape out from. So our fence around our garden is a 4-foot fence, and we've never had, our garden is 8 by 16. That was actually a sketch of the area size that I showed you a few slides back. And we have not had deer jump into our garden area. Okay, our garden down in the cities was a little bit bigger. And we again had about a 4-foot fence. And we did have deer jump in there a couple of times, but we actually strung, we just used string, like gardening type string, across the top and with flags on it. And that will also make the area look smaller, and it ended up deterring the deer from jumping back in. Okay, so they did a little bit of damage initially, but then they left it alone after that. So this is actually something I found on, I mean, had experienced personally, but actually found a study on the university's extension website that discussed a guy that used cattle fencing, which is like a 48-inch to 50-inch fencing enclosure. And he used like cable ties to just make the enclosure around an area. And you can use it to prevent the deer from accessing new shrubs, you know, young trees and stuff too, not just flowering plants, of course. Okay. This is the fun one. There are deer and rabbit repellents available in a lot of gardening stores and big box stores. And it's a material, a liquid product that you spray on your plants. It makes it smell bad and presumably taste bad for the deer and the rabbits. But when the university, again, back to the university, they did a study on the various commercially available repellents and a do-it-yourself recipe. And they found that the do-it-yourself recipe was more effective than most of the commercial products. And and what it is you take 3 whole eggs, use your blender with some water, blend them well into some water, and then put that in a container and make it up to a 1-gallon volume. Strain it so that there's, anyway, strain it, and then apply it with a hand sprayer or a tank sprayer, depending on the area that you're treating. When you're spraying plants, make sure you spray until the leaves are coated. There's an actual sheen on the leaves. It's sort of like an egg wash for plants, you know. And it does need to be reapplied every couple of weeks or after heavy rain. And I suppose after a heavy watering too, if you're doing a sprinkler type watering. If you're doing, you know, soaker or drip, that wouldn't apply. The issue with this stuff is if the solution sits for more than a day, it does get to be rather strong smelling, okay? And the note in the article on the university website said, so don't apply it if you're planning on company in the next day or two. It also said it's difficult to wash from hands and clothing. So as you're applying it, you know, keep that in mind as you're using that to repel your deer. I have to go back to the initial slide on pests, and that deer and rabbits under severe feeding pressure, this is not going to work as well. But if this is just something handy and convenient for the deer, this is probably going to be effective. It won't work in the winter or over winter. You're going to have to use some other means of protecting trees and things in the winter. Yeah. Well, it depends on how I have a raised bed that's only this tall, that's only 2 feet tall. It's kind of iffy, although we have very few rabbits in our area. But a raised bed that's higher than that, if you're above that 2-foot fencing that's required to keep rabbits out, a raised bed higher than 2 feet should work. Right, right. Okay. Oh, one last thing about the do-it-yourself deer repellent. It also mentioned, the study also mentioned that if they added something to make it smell less bad, you know, thinking that, well, at least it won't bother me, it made the do-it-yourself deer repellent less effective. So you kind of have to go with the straight egg wash. Okay. So these are the 3 things that I spoke from and referenced. The first one is the link to the soil test form. And there's other information on there as well. Again, the instructions and such. The next one is the University of Minnesota's Extension website. It is an awesome resource for information on all kinds of plants, what kind of native plants will do well in my area, in my zone, and so on. It's just a wealth of information. And the Crow Wing County Master Gardener's website as well for information on all things plants. So, are there any questions? Make them easy. Oh, okay. I'm sure there are. Off the top of my head, I can. Oh, thank you, Sharon, or Sally. Thank you, Sally. Yeah, root vegetable, what she said, root vegetables. They grow so fast. Yeah, yeah. You could start them, but it's just, as you said, not worth it. And some of those things can actually be grown in containers as well. You don't even have to put them in the ground. All right.
When you talk about insects, what about grubworms?
There are things. She asked about finding grub worms in your garden. Grubs can be a problem because they will eat the roots of your plants. And there are things, again, like Grub-X, basically a targeted insecticide. Christine, were you going to say something?
Bring them home and you want to put up, I have put a little loose oil or butcher paper
Right.
around, more of a problem in ground, less of a problem
In pots, right.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, Right. What Christine recommended and what we have done actually at the Arboretum in the Giving Garden there is around the tomato plants, put a ring of, like she said, foil. We actually were using more like a waxed butcher paper, a little heavier paper in the soil about 1.5 inches deep. And that will protect the roots of the plant from the grubworms accessing them and prevent some of that go on. Well, it actually, you're putting it in the soil like this, standing it that way, and it makes a barrier. Yeah. Yeah. What do you use, Karen? Oh, yeah, yeah. Yep, that works too. Thank you. Yes. Oh, the pea pots, the peat pot itself. Immersing them in water before you start the seeds or before you put them in the ground? Yes, yes, that's a really good idea. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
My problem with peacock is that I had difficulty regulating the moisture in the soil when I did that versus just using potting soil to start the seeds. But I know other people love them. They're self-contained, they're easy to transplant. So how has anybody else dealt with the regulating moisture in the peacock? The peacock in their grow light, so they dry pretty evenly. Mine did, I was doing the same thing, and I just had, but I just spray them after I pour water on them, I spray them. I spray them.